All right, folks. So we are going to look at the chapter 6 notes. So I'm going to have to refresh here so I can get to them. Hopefully it comes up. Take a little bit of time here. Maybe. Let's see if I can just go this way. There we go. Nope, that's not what I want. All right, so here we go. We are talking about energy flow, exploring the nature of energy flow inside of an ecosystem. Big things that we need to understand are energy is the ability to do work. It's not something that creates change. It takes energy to change. For instance, your car starting, moving from standing still or moving, your stovetop being hot or cold, going from hot to cold, your classroom from dark to light, all different ways of change, and energy being a key component to that. The two types of energy that we talk about is kinetic, which is energy in motion. There's some examples there. Sound of your teacher talking, me right now. Light moves in waves, so sunlight is technically kinetic energy moving. Heat, electricity is the movement of objects. Those are all examples of kinetic energy. When we talk about electricity, that's just electrons moving down a path. That potential energy is what we call the stored energy. And we look at that a lot when we are talking about chemicals being stored as energy, as in food that all organisms need. They either can make their own food as a producer, which we'll talk about in this lecture, or they need to consume their food. Okay. There's a good picture right here of water behind a dam. Has a lot of potential energy. Stretched rubber band also contains what we call elastic potential energy. Understand that the total amount of energy in the universe is constant. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It can change from one form into another, though. So everything in an organism, does require some kind of energy. For example, growing new cells, maintaining body pressure, pumping blood through the body, moving, escaping from predators, all require energy. So most organisms obtain energy through photosynthesis or by eating other organisms. Photosynthesis is that process that begins when we take water and carbon dioxide and we change it into sugar and oxygen. I'm gonna go ahead and change that right now. With the help of sunlight. Okay. The sugar being glucose, which is stored energy, and the oxygen, what we like to breathe, with the aid of sunlight. So sunlight is a very important aspect of this because it's what helps the plant or algae or some bacteria to be able to harness that energy and take the carbon dioxide and water and change it into glucose and oxygen. Again, during this reaction, that energy from the sunlight doesn't disappear. It just becomes part of the energy that is transformed and kept in those chemical bonds of the glucose molecule. Again, some is transformed into heat and it's released back into the atmosphere. Some of the sunlight is just directly reflected back into the atmosphere. When we talk about primary production, that's the process that results in tissues of plants and other photosynthetic organisms form when they combine glucose with other molecules. That's basically the mass that we're talking about that the producer creates. Cellular respiration is the biological process by which organisms are going to use oxygen to release the potential energy stored in glucose. So basically, we're taking glucose and we're forming it into a molecule that we call ATP, or androgen triphosphate, and that's what we use at the cellular level to power our different cellular processes, and that's done in the mitochondria. So these producers are plants or other photosynthetic organisms that use sunlight to produce the glucose, and they're going to form that energy. Primary production is affected by a couple different things: temperature, moisture, and nutrients. It can be measured in a lot of different ways also, but the one way that we measure is mass per area unit of time. So there's an image right there in your notes. It talks about different ecosystems and how they have a different amount of primary production. So as we look down here at these factors, light is very important. Again, without light, you can't have photosynthesis. So when you look at some of the examples, like out in the middle of the ocean, the further you go down, the photo area, or the photo light that is given off by the sun, as you get deeper and deeper into the ocean, is not as available. So you don't have as many photosynthetic animals, or not animals, but organisms down there. So ecosystems near the poles also have low primary production. On the contrary, though, at the equator, you have a lot of primary production. That's why we have more of our tropical areas during that, or tropical rainforests and ecosystems in that area. Temperature is also very important. Chemical reactions are influenced by temperature as they proceed slowly at low temperature and increase as temperatures go up. For the most part, when we look at the producers that are in certain areas, they are really adapted to photosynthesize at the average temperature of their own ecosystem. Carbon dioxide is definitely needed in both the terrestrial and aquatic systems, and it's rarely limits the primary production. Water can, though, especially like in deserts and tundras and prairies where water's not enough, that could hinder primary production. But the nutrients are very important. So you got to have carbon dioxide, you got to have water, and you got to have sunlight to grow. Food chains is the next thing that we're going to talk about. They show a specific pathway of energy flow in a community. Remember, energy flow is that transfer of energy from one organism to another. Producers take a form of energy, the sunlight, and converts it into a form of energy that most organisms can use, which is called glucose, which begins the energy flow process. Now, a producer is often, not often, but has to be ingested or eaten by a consumer. There are three different types of consumers that we're going to talk about right here. Herbivores eat only plants and other producers. Carnivores eat only consumers, so really only meat. And omnivores eat both producers and consumers. When we look at a food chain, it shows how energy is transferred from producer to a different consumer. Now, a food chain goes from one organism to the next. Okay, it's very simple. And there's an example there where you have the algae being eaten by the pond snail being eaten by, it says a bullfrog, but it looks like a northern crayfish. Then the northern crayfish being eaten, kind of hard to see right here, by the fish being eaten by the northern water snake, and then finally the water snake being eaten by the mink. So when we look at that, food chains show a specific pathway for energy from the sun that is transferred by the producer and then incorporates through the tissue of different organisms. Food webs are complex illustrations of interconnected food chains. So basically, a food web is multiple food chains put together. So it's kind of a where's it going to go kind of thought process. How does it work out? This animal could eat this animal could eat this animal, different things. This animal could eat this producer and this producer given the chance. So what you see with the food web is you see more complexity. We also add in detrivorts and decomposers. So detrivorts are organisms that get their energy by feeding on dead organisms. Okay. Common detrivorts are like crayfish, worms, and a couple aquatic insects. Decomposers also feed on dead organisms, but they break the organisms down even further. They take large molecules found in the tissue and create carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins and break them down to much simpler molecules, such as carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Some species that affect, I gotta continue to do this. I gotta redo that.
Please come to the office. Alex Lewis and Abby Jaspering, please come to the office.
Yeah. All right, no problem. Okay, no problem. Bye-bye.